You're currently listening to or watching Prophetic News in Focus.
More evacuations have been ordered in Houston's southwestern suburbs, where the Brazos River is expected to rise 3 feet above its previous flood record. Federal disaster declarations indicate floods and rain from Harvey are impacting more than 6 million people. Harvey hit land as a hurricane and became a tropical storm. Houston area authorities say many boat owners are volunteering to help the flood rescue effort. One Harris County official says the boaters are a tremendous help to rescue crews who've been overwhelmed with calls. The U.S. military says Japanese forces will practice deploying anti-missile batteries. The tests come amid concerns about North Korean missiles. And thousands gathered in Berkeley, California for an anti-hate rally. Things were largely peaceful until a group of anarchists overran police barricades. 13 people were arrested. Matt Small, The Associated Press, with AP News.
President Trump approved a request that I made yesterday for a federal emergency declaration here in Louisiana. That declaration covers 5 parishes. They are Beauregard, Calcasieu, Cameron, Jefferson Davis, and Vermilion parishes. Did speak with Brock Long, the administrator of FEMA, early this morning, where he confirmed that the president did sign the declaration upon our request. And obviously, if we need to and the situation warrants, we can add additional parishes to the declaration moving forward. And we do have a long way to go with this particular storm. As we told you all and the folks of Louisiana last week, this is going to play out over several days. That's exactly what's happening. The storm is more or less stationary, but to the extent that it's actually moving towards the east in our direction. And that makes this obviously a dangerous situation for our state, especially those people on the western portion of our state. Of course, it's going to drop a lot of rain the entire time, and as it moves further east, we can expect that those rain bands will also move further east. And so in all likelihood, the worst is yet to come for us in Louisiana. As you all know, we've had more than our fair share of afternoon thunderstorms throughout the summer, and so the rain had already saturated the ground before this event ever started. Specifically with respect to southwest Louisiana, through Friday, so by the end of this work week, they're anticipating a total of 10 to 15 inches of additional rain. In addition to that, the storm surge forecast, again, has gone back up a little bit to between 1 to 3 feet of storm surge above ground level. One of the things that I want to say again, and we say it in all of these natural disasters that result in flooding, please don't drive through any standing water if you don't know the depth and don't know for certain that it's safe for you to do so. That is a very dangerous thing to do, and we've seen that play out now in Texas, where that was responsible for at least one fatality over there as well.
Syrian government forces supported by Russian airspace forces reportedly eliminated the most battle-tested and well-armed unit of ISIS in the Euphrates River Valley last weekend. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, over 800 ISIS members, 13 battle tanks, 39 pickup trucks armed with large-caliber machine guns, and 9 mortars and artillery guns were destroyed during the clashes near Ghanem al-Ali village. The ministry added that the government forces are now advancing against ISIS along the Euphrates River. The Syrian Arab Army and its allies took back Sabqa and Ghanem al-Ali villages and continued developing momentum in order to retake the rest of areas near Ma'adan, seized by ISIS during its large attack last week, according to pro-government sources. The ISIS-linked news agency Amaq claimed that the Russian airspace forces carried out over 100 airstrikes on ISIS positions in the southern Raqqa countryside over the weekend and claimed that about 50 SAA servicemen were killed in an SVB IED attack. Reports have been circulating that at least 60 SAA service members have been killed and about 300 others have been missing since the start of the ISIS counterattack in southern Raqqa. In central Syria, the SAA and its allies recaptured from ISIS the entire area north of Palmyra, liberating about 2,000 kilometers squared from the terrorist group. The SAA also seized the Syria Tel Hill, 30 kilometers east of Al-Sukna town, on the Al-Sukna Deir ez-Zor highway, deploying in less than 75 kilometers away from Deir ez-Zor city, besieged by ISIS. Meanwhile, clashes continued in the Ukay Rabat area, where another group of ISIS units has been encircled by the SAA. The SAA, Hezbollah, and the Lebanese armed forces got full control over Kalamoun area at the Syrian-Lebanese border after ISIS had agreed to withdraw from it under a ceasefire deal. About 350 ISIS fighters and their families were set to be evacuated to Deir ez-Zor. On Sunday, the Iraqi army and the popular mobilization units liberated the entire city of Tal Afar from ISIS in northern Iraq. Government forces also advanced in the Tal Afar countryside, liberating the villages of Al-Alfliya, Kuitla, Qasr, Al-Huruniya, Al-Fu, Kabak, Al-Alva Aliyah, as well as Al-Qis camp, the Tal Afar gas station, and other nearby areas. The Joint Operations Command released a statement on Sunday claiming that government forces killed over 200 ISIS members, as well as defused 105 IEDs and 15 booby-trapped houses. Meanwhile, Iraqi warplanes reportedly destroyed about 60 ISIS vehicles withdrawing from Tal Afar in the direction of Al-Ayadiyah. The army and the PMU will likely secure the entire Tal Afar pocket in the near future.
Day 2 of the catastrophic flooding in Houston, and the picture of devastation comes into focus. Overwhelmed rescue workers are still saving the stranded. Droves of weary survivors wading towards safety, and the water level in some areas is expected to rise. More than 70 centimeters of rain has already fallen on Houston. It continues to fall, and still more is in the forecast. But that is not the only danger. Now, the dams and levees in the area are holding back so much water, they are at the point of bursting, and engineers are having to make the difficult decision of letting some of that water pass, warning people who live downstream that more flooding is to come and that they should get out.
Harvey is still a dangerous and historic storm. According to the National Weather Service, who you'll hear from shortly, rainfall amounts as much as 2 feet have occurred in the Houston metro area, and life-threatening flooding will occur over a large portion of South Central and Southeast Texas in the coming days. Rivers won't crest until later this week.
Hundreds of people have already made their way to emergency shelters by foot, bus, and dump trucks. The government says it expects to shelter a total of 30,000 people.
I have 3 feet of water in my house. 3 feet in my bed, in my hospital bed at the house, because I'm bedridden. There's water in all the beds in the house. We've lost every strip of furniture, every couch, everything.
In all, 13 million people across Texas and Louisiana are under flood warnings. This is unprecedented in American history. President Donald Trump plans to visit where Harvey made landfall Tuesday. But now Harvey is expected to make a second landfall in the coming days. Its impact expected to worsen.
In Texas, at least 5 people have died amidst catastrophic flooding in Houston, the 4th largest city in the United States. The crisis began on Friday when Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Rockport, Texas. It was the most powerful hurricane to hit Texas in more than half a century. The National Weather Service issued a warning saying, quote, "This event is unprecedented and all impacts are unknown and beyond anything experienced. Follow orders from officials to ensure safety," unquote. The Washington Post reports the storm's already dumped more than 9 trillion gallons of water, enough water to fill the Great Salt Lake and Salt Lake City twice. And meteorologists project another 5 to 10 trillion gallons of water could be dumped on the region in coming days. This is U.S. Coast Guard Vice Admiral Carl Schultz.
This is a very, very dangerous storm with catastrophic consequence, and folks need to not underestimate that. It is going to be a sustained challenge for the coming days. Many times folks wrongly presume the wind event is going to be the most challenging event. I've seen over the course of my career, it was actually the water event, and we are in for a real significant water event in the coming days.
Both the death toll and the flooding are expected to rise in the coming days. We'll go to Houston after headlines. In more climate-related news, more than 1,200 people have now died amidst historic flooding in Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. This year's monsoon season has brought torrential downpours that have submerged wide swaths of South Asia, destroying tens of thousands of homes, schools, and hospitals, and affecting up to 40 million people. On Sunday, Pope Francis prayed for the victims of the flooding.
Dear brothers and sisters, in the past days, major floods have hit Bangladesh, Nepal, and northern India. I express my closeness to the people, and I pray for the victims and those who suffer because of this calamity.
Scientists have linked increasing rainfall and deadly flooding in South Asia to climate change. Southern China is also reeling from extreme weather as a severe tropical storm made landfall Sunday, only days after a historic typhoon killed 22 people. Typhoon Hato was the fiercest typhoon to hit Macau on China's southern coast in nearly 50 years. Back in the United States, as Hurricane Harvey was bearing down on Texas, President Trump pardoned the notorious Arizona sheriff, Joe Arpaio, who was convicted of contempt of court for defying a court order to stop his deputies from racial profiling. Arpaio has been a major supporter of Donald Trump. Arpaio's policies have included detaining immigrants in a scorching outdoor tent city jail, which Arpaio once referred to as his own concentration camp. Arpaio was ousted as Maricopa County's longtime sheriff after immigrants organized a massive grassroots voting campaign against him. Immigrant rights activists have widely condemned the pardon, saying Trump's pardon sanctions illegal discrimination against immigrants. This is Francisca Porchas of the group Puente Arizona speaking on Democracy Now!
For us, it's a slap in the face of all of the years of organizing that it took for us to hold him accountable, of the lawsuit that came because of his racial profiling in the streets. Who should be pardoned are the people who he criminalized, the people who are now not ever going to be able to come out of the shadows, as you may say, or have a real chance at living a normal life.
We'll speak with Linda Valdez, an editorial writer with the Arizona Republic, later in the broadcast. The United Nations has condemned President Trump over his response to the deadly white supremacist violence in Charlottesville, saying it was deeply concerned by, quote, the failure at the highest political level of the United States of America to unequivocally reject and condemn the violence, unquote. Trump has faced widespread backlash over his response, including from National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn, who reportedly drafted a resignation letter following Charlottesville. In an interview with the Financial Times, Cohn said Trump's administration, quote, must do better in consistently and unequivocally condemning these groups, unquote. In recent days, 3 people have been arrested and charged in connection with the violence on August 12th, in which white supremacists killed 1 person and wounded dozens more. Among those arrested was Richard Wilson Preston, the imperial wizard of the Baltimore area Confederate White Knights, who was charged with firing a gun near a school. Video footage shows Preston, who is wearing a bulletproof vest, walk up to an African-American man at close range and fire a shot at the ground right in front of him. He then turned around and walked past a line of state troopers who witnessed the shooting but did not move. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma, the newly appointed police chief of Texoma has resigned after the local news revealed he was the owner of a neo-Nazi website. The Southern Poverty Law Center says former police chief Bart Alsbrook was also previously the Texas coordinator of the skinhead group Blood and Honor. Trump's former White House advisor, Sebastian Gorka, has left the White House and says he'll rejoin the far right-wing website Breitbart News. The White House claimed it fired Gorka, though Gorka claims he resigned. The Jewish newspaper The Forward has reported Gorka has ties to a Hungarian far-right Nazi allied group and that he supported an anti-Semitic and racist paramilitary militia in Hungary while he served as a Hungarian politician. At Breitbart, Gorka will work alongside former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who also left the White House earlier this month. On Friday, President Trump signed a directive instructing the military to stop paying for medical treatment for transgender people currently serving in the U.S. military and halting an Obama-era plan that would have allowed transgender people to be recruited into the U.S. Armed Forces. The move follows Trump's announcement last month on Twitter that he'd ban transgender people from serving in the U.S. military. Among those who've criticized Trump over the ban is Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke's daughter, Jennifer Detlefsen, who's a Navy veteran, and said of Trump, quote, "This man is a disgrace." This is ACLU attorney Chase Strangio speaking on Democracy Now! Friday just before Trump signed the memo.
The reality is that the military has $1 billion in their budget for health care. This is a fraction of that, and what it reflects is a misunderstanding and discrimination of transgender individuals.
The U.S. military currently spends about $8.4 million on medical services for transgender troops, a fraction of the military's budget. In contrast, the Center for American Progress says President Trump has run up a $29 million budget on his 11 trips to his private golf resorts, Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster, so far this year. In Yemen, a U.S.-backed Saudi-led airstrike killed at least 16 civilians when it struck a residential neighborhood in the capital Sana'a on Friday morning. Among the victims were 8 children. The United Nations says at least 42 civilians were killed by Saudi-led bombing last week alone. In Somalia, U.S. soldiers and Somali troops carried out a raid in which 10 people were shot dead, including 3 children, in a village near the capital, Mogadishu, on Friday. Local lawmakers say the victims were farmers. This is an eyewitness to the attack.
American forces attacked us in our farms and killed these people, including children. Those killed were farmers who were innocent and not al-Shabaab fighters.
In South Sudan, at least 19 people were killed, including a U.S. journalist, amidst fighting between South Sudanese forces and rebel soldiers in the southern town of Kaya on Saturday. 26-year-old freelance journalist Christopher Allen was embedded with the rebel soldiers when he was killed. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 2013. Fighting in South Sudan has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced more than 1 million since 2014. The U.S.-backed Iraqi military says it seized control of Tal Afar from ISIS militants. The 8-day offensive to take control of the city, which sits about 50 miles west of Mosul, was backed by a U.S. bombing campaign. In Afghanistan, a suicide bomb attack at the entrance to a Shiite mosque in the capital, Kabul, killed up to 30 people gathering for Friday prayers. ISIS militants have claimed responsibility for the attack. Meanwhile, at least 13 Afghan soldiers and civilians were killed in a suicide bomb attack on a military convoy in Helmand province Sunday. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for the attack. In Spain, 500,000 people poured into the streets of Barcelona Saturday for a peace march following the attack earlier this month, in which 15 people died after a van plowed into a crowded walkway along Las Ramblas, the city's most famous avenue. The protest was largest in Barcelona since the 2003 march against the Iraq War. This is protester Gemma Figueres.
We have to say we are not afraid, but you obviously feel it could happen to you at any time, and that is scary. But fear cannot beat us, and we cannot stand still. We have to show that we keep living. That is what we have to do.
In the Israeli-occupied West Bank, thousands of people attended the funeral of an 8-year-old Palestinian girl who was run over and killed by an Israeli settler on Saturday near Nablus. The girl, Asila Boun, was leaving a supermarket with a friend when she was struck and killed by the Israeli settler in broad daylight in front of her father. In Burma, more than 100 people have been killed amidst clashes and a widespread crackdown by the Burmese army against the persecuted Rohingya Muslims in the Rakhine region. Burmese authorities say members of an armed Rohingya group launched a raid on a police station Friday. Residents say in response, Burmese security forces stormed Rohingya towns, opened fire on civilians, torching homes and forcing thousands to flee. This is one Rohingya refugee, Mujibur Rahman, who fled into Bangladesh.
In our village, there was huge fighting, so I have come here, taken shelter near the border, and we want to stay here in Bangladesh because in our country there is much repression, so we are here. We appeal to the Bangladesh government to allow us to stay for some days. After that, when there is peace in our country, we will go back.
Rohingyas have long faced persecution and violence in Burma, where they're denied citizenship. In Guatemala, protesters poured into the streets of Guatemala City Sunday to protest against corruption amidst a standoff between Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales and the highest court over whether Morales could expel the head of a UN anti-corruption task force. President Morales ordered the expulsion of Ivan Velasquez, the head of the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala Sunday, only days after the commission said the president should be investigated for illegal campaign financing. Only hours later, Guatemala's Constitutional Court suspended the president's order. This is protester Patricia de Leon.
The problem the president has is not just the allegations against him and his family. He's a president who has not carried out his duties in these 2 years, and the people of Guatemala are sick of so much poverty, of so much corruption, highways you can't use, children who are malnourished, and there's been no position from this government. Morales is a clown, a buffoon, corrupt.
President Morales, a former comedian, was elected in 2016 after massive anti-corruption protests ousted the now jailed former president Otto Perez Molina, who is also formerly a U.S.-backed military leader during Guatemala's dirty wars. The Trump administration's imposed new economic sanctions against Venezuela amidst Trump's threats of a possible U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. The sanctions will further restrict Venezuela's ability to borrow money from U.S. creditors, making it possible that Venezuela will default on its debts later this year. The Trump administration slated to lift a ban on the transfer of military equipment to local police departments. The 1033 program was halted after widespread protests and outrage following the local police's military-style occupation of Ferguson, Missouri, amidst the uprising over the police killing of unarmed African-American teen Michael Brown. And in New York City, protesters rallied Friday night at Columbus Circle in Manhattan to demand the 76-foot statue of Christopher Columbus be removed amidst a nationwide movement calling for the removal of statues celebrating the Confederate generals and other racist leaders. Columbus has long faced criticism for opening the door to the European colonization of the Americas, the genocide against Native peoples, and the transatlantic slave trade. Columbus himself enslaved Arawak indigenous people and forcibly trafficked them from the Caribbean to Spain. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says he's considering ordering the removal of the Columbus statue in Manhattan.
Tropical Storm Harvey continues to ravage southeast Texas as the state's governor orders 1,000 more National Guard members to help. This morning, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is also expected to release water from 2 reservoirs in an attempt to protect downtown Houston. CBN's Jenna Browder has the story.
Harvey has Houston under siege. Torrential rains are engulfing the country's 4th largest city as rising water chases thousands of people to higher ground.
We got you. We got you. Don't worry.
Rescues continued overnight. Dramatic moments like this one caught on camera.
We need help in 5th Ward. We need people here to evacuate people. Get people here now before they die.
With more than 56,000 calls in less than 24 hours, the 911 system is being overrun. Many people say they can't even get through. The geography is a big part of the problem as rainwater is forced onto the streets, then into bayous easily overwhelmed by heavy downpours. Buffalo Bayou runs through the middle of Houston and looks like this, 15 feet over flood stage, a level never seen before. In League City, southeast of Houston, an astounding 30 inches of rain has fallen. And the storm is not letting up. Forecasters say some areas could see as much as 50 inches before it passes. An event of this magnitude, rare to say the least. President Trump tweeting, "Now experts are calling Harvey a once-in-500-year flood. We have an all-out effort going on and going well." First responders and Good Samaritans are working around the clock, trying to keep up with all of the cries for help. Those rescued often left with nothing.
It's like memories that get taken away by something that you don't expect. But I mean, it's all just materialistic stuff.
President Trump monitored the situation from Camp David over the weekend. He says he's ready to travel to Texas as soon as he can without causing disruption. The White House says the trip will happen on Tuesday. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
The one-time Category 4 hurricane known as Harvey may now just be a tropical storm, but it is still a deadly situation for most of Texas. Harvey has claimed at least 2 lives and continues to pound the state with heavy rain and strong wind. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales has been tracking the storm on the ground in Texas.
With no electricity, members of Rock City Church in Flower Bluff, Texas, which is right next door to Corpus Christi, still gathered for Sunday's service. They used the power of God to lighten up their hearts and their minds and turn to God for help during this trying time.
So the work never stops for us as Christians. We know that. And we just get leaner and meaner. And we shine brighter and brighter in a dark world.
It's that faith of Christ that brought many literally out of the storm.
My church is barely standing anymore. It's the church got demolished. Our high school, it took a pretty big beating. I'm actually headed back over there as soon as I get some more diesel. Headed over there to Rockport right now, see if we can't help out a little bit more.
Late Friday evening, the Category 4 hurricane slammed into the Texas coastline hard, bringing howling 130-mile-per-hour winds combined with sheets of rain to cities like Rockport and Port Aransas, just a few miles north of Corpus Christi, where hundreds of thousands of homes are without power and residents are forced to boil their water before drinking it.
It didn't get real until the wind started howling, and then you kind of sit there and go, this is really happening. There's nothing we can do. So we huddled up in the living room and hunkered down and just said some prayers, and luckily everything held up on our end.
But not for everyone. The storm has taken lives and snapped power poles like toothpicks, flipped boats as if they were toys, and left a path of destruction. Although Harvey quickly lost steam as it made landfall, dropping from a Category 4 to a tropical storm, it stalled, bringing dozens of tornadoes in and around Houston. This is what happens when you get too much water too fast. This is the freeway behind me. Yes, a freeway. It's at least 10 feet of water. Houston police say at least one woman died after she tried to get out of her car too fast due to the rising floodwaters and drowned.
North Korea is back to carrying out its ballistic missile test. Friday night, the regime launched 3 missiles. 2 flew for about 150 miles, and the other reportedly blew up. They did not threaten the U.S. or Guam, but they could strike U.S. military bases in South Korea. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says regardless of the actual threat, the tests are unacceptable.
Well, the firing of any ballistic missile is a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. And we do view it as a provocative act, a provocative act against the United States and our allies. We continue to want the Kim regime to understand there is a different path that he can choose. The international community has been quite clear with the unanimous 15-0 approval of the UN Security Council resolution imposing the most stringent sanctions ever to be imposed on North Korea.
The tests coincide with joint U.S. and South Korean military exercises in the South. President Trump is still taking hits for pardoning former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio late Friday night. Arpaio was convicted of criminal contempt for refusing to turn detained illegal immigrants to federal immigration authorities. The president's latest criticism comes from Vice President Joe Biden. He wrote in an Atlantic article, "The president's contempt for the U.S. Constitution and willingness to divide this nation knows no bounds. Now, he's pardoned a law enforcement official who terrorized the Latino community, violated its constitutional rights." The president continues to receive backlash from his comments on the events in Charlottesville as well. The president's team has held talks in both Tel Aviv and Ramallah. President Trump's advisors, Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, met separately with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. But one thing they didn't mention publicly was the idea that a peace plan would include what's called the two-state solution. That would involve the creation of a Palestinian state. Not mentioning it raises doubts that the idea will be on the table in future discussions. Americans say it's ultimately up to the Israelis and Palestinians to make peace and not the U.S. President Trump is pressing ahead with the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, but visiting U.S. congressmen say the situation on the ground is not what it seems. CBN's Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl is on this story.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Trump advisors Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt in Tel Aviv.
We have a lot of things to talk about. How to advance peace, stability, and security in our region, prosperity too. And I think all of them are within our reach.
The president is very committed to achieving a solution here that will be able to bring prosperity and peace to all people in this area.
While Netanyahu's office described the talks as constructive and substantive, U.S. Congressman Mac Thornberry told CBN News the U.S. may need to rethink the solution.
The key fundamental point is that what we have always believed, that there has to be a two-state solution, that Israel can be more secure if it trades off some land, that would become a Palestinian state. Those assumptions are really in doubt, are being questioned. And some of the questions are, what's in the best interest of the people?
Protesting Palestinians expressed their displeasure ahead of Kushner's meeting with President Mahmoud Abbas.
We are totally unhappy that this American administration has conducted no pressure on Israel to stop settlement activities that are killing any potential for peace.
Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria remain one of the thorniest issues in the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. Senator James Lankford told CBN News that worldwide perception of growth in the region is inaccurate.
A lot of the growth, just population growth, what some people call settlements, is really just new people born and new houses need to be built. So there's a lot of those new neighborhoods that are coming up, as well as expansion of existing neighborhoods, just to support the population of so many Jews moving from around the world still to Israel, as well as those that are born here, just needing new places.
And Lankford says there's more that you don't see in the media.
In just a couple of years since I've been in the Samaria area, for instance, there's been a tremendous amount of growth in factories and development. Many of those factories popping up in that area have Israelis and Palestinians working together side by side.
Thornberry hopes there's change ahead.
If we are creative and think outside the box, maybe that there are new possibilities. And that's in everybody's best interest, especially the people who live in Israel and in the West Bank area.
Both congressmen made it clear it's ultimately up to the Israelis and Palestinians to make peace, not the U.S. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, a college president with a trigger warning for incoming students. This is not a safe space, and it's not supposed to be. He'll explain why. Well, it is the end of August and many high school graduates are heading off to college for the very first time. But what they learn when they get there may alarm their parents. Our Emily Jones has more.
Safe spaces, trigger warnings, and microaggressions. Welcome to college life in America.
The new school year is here, and students are packing up and leaving home expecting to learn about the real world. Except when they get there, they're oftentimes met with an atmosphere that feels more like a daycare instead of an institute of higher learning.
Instead of openly debating challenging ideas, students are turning to intellectual safe spaces or trigger warnings to avoid hearing, seeing, or reading anything they disagree with. We asked college students what they think about these trends. Responses ranged from supportive to skeptical.
We want people to feel comfortable, and we want people to not go around and be like, people are making me upset. People are really disagreeing with what I believe in.
I don't think it's a good idea. I feel like people need to express themselves.
Students who take safe spaces and trigger warnings to the extreme are willing to protest, harass, and even bar speakers they don't like from campus. Take Ben Shapiro, for example. He recently testified to Congress about this growing safe space culture creeping on our college campuses.
All of our views should be judged on their merits, not on the color or sex or sexual orientation of the speaker, and those views should never be banned on the grounds that they offend someone.
Even Christian colleges are not immune. Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, writes about it in his new book, Not a Daycare: The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. Emily Jones, CBN News.
And joining me now is Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University and author of Not a Daycare. Thank you so much for being here.
For my pleasure.
Pleasure. Now, in your book, you give some examples of some, I guess, outrageous student behavior. Students seeking compensation for emotional labor, asking for time off after the trauma of this year's election. The list goes on and on. What's fueling this?
Terrible ideas, terrible education. Richard Weaver wrote a work in 1948. It was titled Ideas Have Consequences, a seminal work. What was his point? Ideas have consequences. Ideas matter. And when you teach bad ideas, you get bad culture, bad kids, bad community, bad government, and bad behavior. You teach good ideas, you get the opposite. And what we're seeing right now is, frankly, Barack Obama's pastor was right. The chickens are coming home to roost. We've taught terrible ideas, self-absorption and narcissism, for example, for decades. And why in the world are we surprised to see self-absorbed and narcissistic students pouting, complaining, and protesting in the campus green?
It's frustrating, I tell you. We're seeing a surge of students, as you mentioned, participating in what they're calling activism for civil rights on campus. As a black man myself, when I think about civil rights, I think about the struggle of my ancestors who, were tortured, beaten, you name it. Do you think the students are a bit confused at what the civil rights fight looks like?
Absolutely. In other words, you can't have justice without a judge. And you can't have a book without an author. You can't have a painting without a painter. The students have been taught that it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you. They've been taught moral and intellectual nihilism. They've been taught that they create everything, that there is no author, there is no painter, there is no writer, and there is no definer, there is no definition of truth other than what they decide. It's narcissism to the max. They gaze into the pool, the image of their iPhone, their Facebook, their social media. They construct their own reality, their own morality, their own ideas. And if you don't agree with their conclusions, you are a bigot, you're a hater. You are the problem. It's ideological fascism. It's not academic freedom, because they will crush you, they will suppress you because you dare to be different.
Let's talk about safe spaces and trigger warnings. Is there ever a place for these on college campuses?
No. Let me quote C.S. Lewis. He told us that the great lion Aslan was not safe, but that he's good. The great lion Aslan was said to be not safe, but good. Well, let's paraphrase that and suggest this. The great lion of the liberal arts, the great lion of the university, the college, the great lion of the ivory tower is not supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be good. There's a huge difference between safe education and good education. I would argue the latter is what it's supposed to be, and the previous one, safe education, is an oxymoron.
I agree with you there. What are some solutions to create real change and to get universities back on track?
We need to return. The subtitle to my book is The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning what? Truth. Jesus told us, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Opinions always lead to bondage and slavery. Truth sets us free. Pol Pot and Mao and Robespierre and Chavez and Hitler and Mussolini, all the despots of history had opinions, and it didn't end well. Jesus said, truth sets us free. There is no freedom without the context of those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. The Apostle Paul called it the truth of God written on every human heart. That needs to be the goal of the academy, not just propping up your opinion or mine.
Real quick, I've got a son about to go to college for the first time. What advice do you have for college students about standing firm on their Christian beliefs and the tips you can give them to speaking truth in love?
Well, I would give you advice as a parent. You and your son should pull aside the college president before you choose to pay to go there. And if he won't meet with you, don't go there. You're paying too much money to be ignored. Pull the president aside and ask him two simple questions, and then just be quiet and listen. And those two questions are this: what's your view of Scripture, and what's your view of truth? Is Scripture the inerrant Word of God, and is truth a revelation of God? If he says that, go there. If he doesn't, don't waste your money.
All right, that is some great advice. Dr. Everett Piper, author of Not a Daycare. Great read, trust me. We'll give you a headache at some points, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was
Thousands of stranded residents in Houston are converging on the city's convention center for shelter from relentless rain. Rescues continue along water-covered streets that are now rivers. The governor activated the state's entire National Guard force to help with rescue and recovery. On Tuesday, President Trump is expected to travel to Corpus Christi, Texas, to observe firsthand the disaster rescue efforts. The federal government has enough disaster aid money to deal with the immediate aftermath for now. And in New Orleans, where rain from Harvey is just beginning to fall, sandbagging is underway. There is concern that the city's pump and drainage system is still not functioning at full capacity nearly 12 years after Hurricane Katrina. And in London, the Notting Hill Carnival is in full swing. Firefighters honored victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. A silent zone was imposed by local residents. Sound systems were muted as the revelers passed by, where at least 80 people died.